We now we having. Oh, someone is calling me. Hello. Well, we wait for our next guest, Ahmed Tiamiju, to join through the meet. I'm just going to tell you that we have also a parallel activity in down in the hall, which is an association which works with recycling clothes. We have arranged an activity with them. They're going to be here for 3 days, and they're going to be gathering for clothes, secondhand clothes that you want to dump to give in. There's a container, and there will be an activity after those days with those clothes. There will be some workshops in a week or two about recycling food, clothes, and so I suggest you to just have a look to this stall. They have brochures and information about the whole issue of waste, textile waste in the world, which is a part of what we're talking about. But we couldn't address everything today in the morning, so we decided to invite them to have a presential participation. So they're down in the hall, and they're going to be here for a few days. So if you want to bring your stuff, there's a container. You can bring bags of clothes and give them in, and that would be really an interesting contribution. So now we have. Do we have? Yeah. Are we ready? I want to welcome Ahmed Tiamiju. Hello, Ahmed. Are you here with us? Okay, we cannot hear you. Can you put on your mic and camera, please? Hello. Hey, can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes. Thank you very much. I'm going to introduce you very briefly and give you the floor. First of all, thank you very much for connecting. Ahmed Tiamiju is, as I mentioned before, he's from Nigeria. He's Executive Director of Community Action Against Plastic Waste, which is a grassroots movement, a non-for-profit and non-governmental organization advancing a toxic-free circular plastic economy for just, inclusive, and sustainable development in over 70 frontline communities in 21 countries across Africa, Asia, Asia-Pacific, and Latin America, and the Caribbean. He's a member of the National Consultation Committee that developed the Nigeria National Environmental Regulation in 2023, and a member of the expert group at the Basel Convention of Small Intersectional Working Group on Plastic Waste Prevent Waste Alliance Steering Committee. We are very, very thankful for you joining us today. I must apologize for the little issue with the connection at the beginning, but I'm sure this is something we have already covered. I have sent you the presentations of our previous lectures, so you can have them and keep track on that. And I just give you the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Andrew, for having me and for the invitation. I would like to share my screen. I think I can share that from here. Okay. Please let me know if you see my screen.
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay, thank you.
If you,
thank you
mind,
very much.
I would just give you. We have like 20 minutes for the presentation, and then we have a little debate. Okay, so.
Okay.
So eventually, I might give you through WhatsApp a little reminder of your timing, but that's it.
Okay.
And the floor is yours.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll try to keep it as very brief as possible. Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. And I was actually able to see a little bit of the previous presentation, which was actually very interesting conversation around work in Kenya. Of course, which organization also have been heavily involved with, both at the African regional level, some other young people that we work with in communities around the country, and of course at global level we work with many NGOs also from Kenya. my topic today was actually to speak generally around the issues on waste, what with particular demand for what does this mean for African continent, for instance, in the context of the Global Plastic Treaty by the United Nations Environment Program, which is currently going on. We're just going to be looking at three key recommendations for an effective global plastic treaty, with the recommendation coming from the particularly the interest of the African continent, and what how does this actually apply to solutions for the continent. So I'm going to be talking about three key issues of plastic production or reduction, chemical transparency, and zero waste economy. So I'll do a little bit introduction about our community. Community Action Against Plastic Waste is mostly a youth-led and youth-focused organization working with mostly young people, vulnerable young people in local community, mostly impacted communities, both in coastal and inland community across Africa, and Australia, of course, in some country in Asia Pacific, and one country in Latin America. So we are a youth organization and a community of young people who are leading locally led solutions, as you can see in some of the picture, from Fiji to Venezuela to Sierra Leone to Liberia to South Sudan to South Africa to Kenya as well, and a few other countries. You can see that we've collected over 80,000 kilograms of plastic waste since we launched the resolution X 10,000, a project which we intend to empower 10,000 young people by the end of this year from 2021. A key introduction about the issues around plastic pollution. I brought this picture to just give some of the highlights around issues about plastic that a lot of time might be difficult for many people to relate with. This is a very interesting picture of a gentleman who is buying a fish from a local fish market, and is requesting for a nylon bag, a plastic bag to put the fish. And the seller is communicating that the plastic is already in the fish. This is the reality of plastic pollution that we face globally today. And WHO has also went into this, identifying plastic and the associated chemicals, chemicals of concern in them as a major global public health issues that we need to deal with. You can go on and on, and plastic, as it has been found in science, has found it in the brain, in our blood, in the highest mountain, in the deepest ocean. So this is to tell how urgent this issue is, and what is and why it must be dealt with as urgent as possible. Some of the statistics, I'm sure some of the presentation before, you've seen some of this before. Since 1950, only 10% of an average global 10% of 10% of plastic has been recycled, and in the United States, which is acclaimed to have some of the best recycling technology globally, only have recycling an average of 9%. This is what you see around the world. This is basically impossible to actually recycle. It's just been a mirage, to just put it mildly, because when you look at around 1.4 million plastic bottles used per minute worldwide, and not to talk of sachets in many developing countries, and the microplastic impact that associates with that. Projected plastic pollution crisis by 2060. These are some of the projections. I'm not going to run through all of the slides because of time, but I hope you could follow out, and I can share the slide with all of the audience after the meeting. So you could look at globally, potentially triple plastic production will triple by 2060. And of course, with most rich country responsible for continued increase in their plastic use, and sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, of course, we also increase, particularly in sachet use of plastic. Plastic waste is expected to triple, with half ending up in landfill. Less than a fifth is projected to be recycled. This will continue to reduce. This is why we need more solution than talking about recycling only. Okay, environmental linkages could double to 44 million metric tons annually. This is not to also talk about the earth impact, and of course the fact that plastic pollution is also a climate issue, which is also increasing impact of climate change globally. Historical context. So in from 2010, there's been a lot of conversation, in the UN Environment Assembly, which is the highest environmental governing body globally, around addressing. It actually started firstly as a marine litter, conversation, then gradually until 2022 in the second section of the UNI 5.2, this agreement was reached to actually have a globally legally binding instrument to address plastic pollution. And these are some of the journey, like I mentioned before, from 2010. But this conversation highlighted from 2014 to 2016. Like in many countries, even in Nigeria and many countries, plastic has always been identified as a litter problem because it is what we can see. So most of this conversation also always start like this. But of course, with more research and more knowledge, we know that there needs to be more holistic, globally approach. Because if one country address issues of plastic, the other country can actually, through border movement, they can be able to. This is in the case of Rwanda and many other countries that we have seen. Who probably one of the foremost countries to have banned plastic, but you can still find the litter in the country today. Why this is matter? First, for opportunity for global production, global plastic pollution, global finance to tackle plastic pollution. Global avenue to unlock systemic change away from plastic at pace and scale. Opportunity to create an international framework to address plastic across its life cycle. Attempt to push the entire petrochemical, plastic, and fast-moving goods companies industry to shift towards reuse and environmentally sound designs. So this, I was talking about making sure that the industry can be able to innovate, because this is the future. Any organization, either in the sector or individual organization, who is not moving away from this are probably, going to die earlier. And this is why it is very important that industry also continue to cooperate and design new innovations to address issue of plastic pollution. And this goes on to all global rule that include upstream measures. So when you talk about upstream measure, we're talking about issues of plastic production, not just talking about managing their waste. Because if you don't turn off the tap from their production, it will be difficult to address, the waste if you don't address how much production that we make in the first place. So these are some of the, and of course, to also harmonize the current heterogeneous plastic regulatory landscape, which was reduce technical complexity, operational cost, and compliance cost as well. We currently have MEAs like Basel Convention, Montreal Protocol, which actually deals with issues of addressing plastic, in different way. But this will be an opportunity to harmonize a global, approach to this. So the part of the resolution of the UNI 5.2 was the INC, establishment of the INC, the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, which is currently being negotiated by over 190 countries from around the world. This was supposed to be concluded in Busan, in South Korea, in last year, December, but unfortunately, the talk, I'm sure this is all over the media, the talk could not be ended because there were, so many conflict of issues among the member states, which is hopefully will be concluded later this year in August. The new date was, I think, will be announced this week. Was supposed to be in Geneva, to conclude this conversation. Some of the highlights about the INCs, for some people that might be, unfamiliar with UN processes. So the INC is a body of member states, that is country of United Nations that will negotiate the plastic treaty. The INC has a bureau made up of 2 representatives from UN regions and 1 representative from small island developing states. And 1 representative will serve as a chair. So at every time there will be a current someone to lead, which will be a chair of the bureau. The bureau is important as it drives the flow of negotiation. For example, setting agendas, suggesting contact groups, where most of where the tetra negotiation happen. 2 general formats which mostly observers can participate. Our organization is observer as well, and mostly we participate in the plenary section and content section. So contact group section, also known as breakout section or working groups. Plenary is main section where most of the conversation and every country, sits behind their flag, and they shared thought about, country position from their capitals. Contact group are smaller informal groups set up to during the meeting to work on specific textual issue, moderated by designated chairs. Also, our member states who are appointed, country who are appointed by the bureau, to steer each conversation. Discussion in these are not to be shared publicly. So mostly Chatham Out rule are applicable to this type of breakout sections. Key recommendation for INC. So this recommendation, I'm going to dive into some of the things that most probably be very relevant to this symposium. So we're talking about some of the key recommendation of plastic reduction, reducing plastic production, and of course reducing the eventual pollution globally, ensuring transparency in use of chemical in plastic production, and promoting zero waste system to minimize environmental impact, including systems like deposits return system, which I'm going to touch on a little bit among the zero waste system solution. So this recommendation, for instance, when we talked about the plastic production reduction, we're talking about addressing issues of 1 million single plastic pollution, plastic bottles. That I'm only talking about bottle, not talking about the bags and the sachets, which are mostly common in developing countries. So we're not even talking about plastic in textiles and in other different type of products and materials. So we're talking only about 1 million plastic bottles that are sold every minute globally. And when you now say pay attention that only about 9 to 10% of this plastic globally have been recycled since 1950. So this is what plastic production we address when we reduce production globally. Also, when we talked about issues around chemical, okay, I'm going to talk about also in terms of subsidies. Are only about 7 trillion subsidies were provided to fossil fuel, petrochemical industry for plastic production only in 2022. This is reported by Financial Times. Only in 2022, more than 7 trillion US dollar. So we're talking about major issues of government, particularly in developing countries, in which many countries don't not even have enough budget to manage major issues. They still spend a lot of money on managing waste. Why, of course, petrochemical industry and the industry generally, who benefit from this production, do not take any responsibility in many countries. Given that there's no existing global extended producer responsibility, and many countries do not have such regulation. So we're talking about shifting this to many public finance globally, and now using public fund for managing some of this waste, why there is not even enough budgetary fund in many countries to manage major issues like many in developing country, for instance. So this is what we're going to, the kind of issues that we're going to address when we tackle the issues of plastic production, and it is reduced at source. There is going to be a lot of many opportunity further for countries, for all parties, including stakeholder like waste speaker and city municipal governments. The importance of chemical transparency. When we talked about chemical transparency, we're talking about sharing comprehensive information about chemicals in plastic production, including their properties, use, and risk. So we're talking about the public right to know about the type of chemicals in the plastic, particularly in food contact material that all of us drink water from, we eat food from. Research has shown recently that people that eat mostly from takeaway plastic are liable to heart failure. because many of the chemicals used in plastic today has been found to to cause, to be carcinogenic, to be endocrine disrupting, many issues around health, including environmental impact. And this is what we're talking about when we talked about chemical transparency, including industry accountability, encouraging safer industry practices, enhancing corporate responsibility and regulatory compliances, building trust and innovation, ensuring that stakeholder transparency and trust, promoting safer and sustainable materials. And of course, overall, there will be improving health and environmental protection, reducing exposure to hazardous chemical, preventing environmental contamination. These are some of the things that we talked about when we talked about addressing issues of chemical transparency. Yeah, finally, this is the last and the third recommendation, which is zero waste economy. So when we talked about economy, we're talking about economic system aimed at minimizing waste generation through responsible production, consumption, reuse, and recovery of products, packaging, and materials. So when we talked about zero waste economy, we have a waste hierarchy that must be followed. One must be done before doing the other. Like for instance, when we talked about plastic, we need to talk about rethinking and redesigning them to be more suitable, to be safer. We're talking about reducing their use. First of all, not unnecessary use, like for instance, in the case of a plastic toothpick, straw. Many of them, like these are unnecessary. That there are many alternatives exist for them to ensure that there are more tangible reduction, and there will be better option in terms of recycling the existing one. We're talking about reuse and repair. The opportunity we reuse and repair is that it will create other new economic linkages, particularly in developing countries. A repair economy system will ensure that there will be a lot of opportunity for other existing economy, opportunity for the informal waste picker, for instance, and job creation in green job for young people within their community. And of course, recycle when this will be, when after the reuse has been explored, and of course, disposal, which will be when what is totally unacceptable when there is no other options. Promoting zero waste economy. So this is what we're talking about. We're talking about reduced process waste, investment infrastructure, developing market for recycled material, and many opportunities like this. So benefits for zero waste economy, such as deposit return system, is equity and equality and justice. There will be just and fair economy in communities and globally as well, in which there will be more economic opportunity for people to participate, particularly those who are most responsible for managing our waste, like the waste picker, which in most countries are not included, in the policy development when you talked about plastic waste management or other waste management. Community involvement, environmental protection, economic benefits. There will be a lot of opportunity in job creation, in reducing pollution and conserve resources, and ensuring that community participation are guaranteed for justice and equity. Waste picker in zero waste economy, like many other speakers have talked about, waste pickers are the backbone of recycling system. There are over 20 million waste pickers globally. This is a lot of opportunity to reduce inequality and reduce poverty when they are involved and they are incorporate into existing waste system. And of course, it will ensure that we reduce a lot of use of virgin material. When we talked about challenges with reducing plastic production, this can be a lot of opportunity to explore. Challenges faced by waste picker, health risk, often invisibilized. In many countries, they are the first, or even in many municipal laws, they are the first people to be displaced. Supporting waste pickers, inclusive policies, skill development, and opportunity for them. Benefits of a zero waste economy system, such as deposit return system. You can imagine these are the enormous benefits of environmental benefits, social benefits, economic benefits. Conclusions and consideration. These are some of the takeaways. By decentrifying plastic production, we remove physical incentive and subsidy to eliminate single-use plastic. Redirect financial incentive to support sustainable practices and innovations such as redesign, reuse, and repair of plastic. Aligned with all of these UN Sustainable Development Goals, particularly under the the Goal 12, 12.2, target 12.4, 12.5, 12.6, and 12.7. These are meant a numerous opportunity and support global efforts to advocate for and support the Global Plastic Treaty, participate in local and global sustainability initiative, encourage policy that include all stakeholders, especially waste speaker and communities, impacted community, frontline community must be prioritized in talking about solution. So these are finally my conclusion. Effort of the INCs is crucial in addressing plastic pollution, even at community level and municipal level. I give you a very instance. Globally, the government of Catalonia from Spain, from the Canadian government of Quebec government in Canada, and Paris. These three governments are leading a very important coalition of subnational and local governments to end plastic pollution. Our organization is also closely working with this coalition and many organizations from around the world to bring their voice into the current global negotiation to ensure that cities all over the world can also participate and ensure that their voices are captured and their priorities are also included in the final negotiation. Chemical transparency, I already talked about this, and we must promote zero waste pollution, and it is very essential that we reduce plastic production in alignment with the SDG 12 for sustainable consumption and production. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very, very much for this very, very insightful, very complex, very complete, very fast presentation, which I'm sure we've all followed with, I wouldn't say with enlightenment, because the quality of the presentation has been excellent, but definitely talking and describing a rather, on the one side, dark present, past, and future, but with big hopes, and especially very interesting stress on the potentialities of alternative solutions. So thank you very much. We're going to go in a row with the three presentations, so we can have a debate afterwards together. So I'm going to give the word to Isan. Okay, to Isan Grich, which is our next lecturer. She's hello.
Hi everyone. Hello.
So Isan is a member of our project Respira Una Europa. She's from Morocco. She's a postdoctoral researcher in data science at the Catholic University of Leuven in the Department of Electric Engineering. She holds a PhD data science from in CS, Mohammed V University in Rabat, and the International University in Rabat. And her research interests include leveraging artificial intelligence for urban air pollution, monitoring the smart cities and respiratory health. And also might add that she's also a very active / activist scientist in monitoring and censoring measurement of air pollution in relation to different sources. So I give you the floor, Isham, and thank you very much for being here. It's a luxury to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction. Yeah, maybe I can already share my screen. Oops. Can you see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Perfect. So I know the field is a little bit far since I will be talking about AI and data science for the environment. but I hope it will be nice and insightful for you all. So why am I interested on air quality for Africa? Because, of course, it is no longer a surprise that air pollution kills 7 million people every year, either indoor or outdoor air pollution, which is more than the toll of unsafe water, malnutrition, and unsafe sanitation altogether. And there is a very nice saying by Philippe Landry-Gamp, who says that Africa is better placed to fight air pollution as the countries are still early in development. They have unique opportunities to avoid becoming entrapped in fossil fuel-based economies, to transition rapidly to wind and solar energy, and to achieve prosperity without pollution. I really like this saying, and I wish it will work out. I'm seeing some countries already switching to cleaner energy or trying to reduce pollution, all sorts of pollution. So I really hope this would be the case in a few years. There are, however, some challenges, like for Africa specifically. There is fewer than a third of the countries in Africa that have legislative instruments containing ambient air quality standards. And there is a lack of infrastructure to monitor the levels of air pollution and also the impact on human health. And 9 out of 13 most populous countries without ambient air monitoring are based in Africa. So we talk about Algeria, Angola, Ethiopia, Democratic Republic of Congo, Kenya, which Ahmed just presented about, Nigeria, Sudan, Tanzania, and Uganda. And there are too few ground stations deployed to monitor air, and their measurements are sporadic. During my PhD, I did a systematic literature review to try to check what are the countries that use more high-cost monitoring or low-cost monitoring stations. When I talk about high-cost monitoring stations, these are the stations that you usually see in the meteorological departments. They cost millions of dollars, but they are very accurate and they give information about a lot of pollutants. So if you look here on the right figure, the high-cost monitoring are mostly based in China, Korea, India, Taiwan, Iran, but mostly you can see China. There's 14 in China, and then 11 in Korea, and then 9 in the USA, and 11 all over Europe. But if you look into the poorer countries, I would say, so for example, in South America or Africa, there is only one that was in South Africa, and there were 3 in South America. However, in the left illustration, you can see that they use more actually low-cost monitoring stations. And the low-cost monitoring stations are basically 100 euros. If it's a good one, it could also reach 400 euros. But we consider them low cost compared to the price of the others. The others also are usually huge monitoring stations that require a lot of maintenance, and they are usually in a very safe area. It could even be the size of a room, of a small room. But the low cost ones are very small, and I will be showing a picture later. And you can see here that Africa, for example, is more comfortable using low cost sensors, but it's also maybe probably because it's also more affordable. Here comes the role of AI and data-driven approaches in air quality monitoring, whether it is low cost or high cost, but also whatever the situation, AI helps drive some insights and some prediction and some forecasting, no matter the type of monitoring used. So we talk about smart sensors, the ones that I just mentioned now, low-cost devices that measure air pollution in real time. So if they are distributed nicely all over the city, they will be as good as the very high monitoring stations that are super expensive, or even better, because the high distribution allows for very good monitoring. There is also the satellite and AI. So AI can help analyze satellite images to track pollution over large areas. And satellite images actually, depending on the satellite that is used. For air pollution, it's usually Sentinel 5G. So these satellites turn around like the globe, and every time they take one measure per day. So if we take one measure per day everywhere in the world, we can use AI and merge it with low-cost monitoring station to have a more broad view and a more accurate one. And there are predictive models that can forecast pollution level based on weather, traffic, and industry activities, or even more. So basically, we don't limit ourselves to air quality data, but we also add some other impacting factors such as weather, or traffic, or insights from people and citizens. And then there's a data sharing cloud platforms that allow researchers, governments, and the public to access and use air quality data. So the data that we gather and we process using AI is usually put public, and I will be giving some examples on the next slides. So I would like to start by a case study that I have done in Morocco within my PhD. And in Morocco, I would say one of the biggest problems that were there is that there is a lot of people going from the countryside to the big cities. And they're going there because they're expecting better housing, more jobs and higher wages, better living conditions. But in reality, it turns out to be the opposite. It's poor housing conditions because of the high number of people, pressure on services, as education, but most importantly, poor air quality. The air quality is always or often worse urban areas rather than rural areas. And for that, we started a study. So I had made a study in CHU, which is the major hospital in Rabat, the capital of Morocco. And it was a medical respiratory study where I found that in Morocco precisely, there is 13,000 deaths that are solely caused by air pollution. And when we went to the hospital to check who are the people that were diagnosed or admitted to the emergency department for a respiratory disease, which either caused death or no, we found that 77% of them had asthma, followed by bronchoalveolitis. So it's actually all of these respiratory diseases is when your bronchs are a little bit blocked, or they're already inflamed. So if there is pollution coming in, it makes them block and have asthma attacks, or virus sequela, or a certain chronic cough or so on. So when we found this, we decided to adopt, this is just probably for people who don't know the cause, of these air pollutants that I'm talking about. It's usually PMs, particulate matters, that are very, very small. Like you can see here, the PM10 is even, or PM2.5 is even smaller than a particle in the hair. And it's usually a sum of tiny solid and liquid droplets. And it's one of the worst pollutants because it actually merges a lot of other pollutants. Either, like usually, if you look into a PM particle, you will find that it has and englobes a lot of other pollutants. And it's the worst also for people that are, for children or people that are vulnerable because either the exposure, because they're often outside, or because their body is still developing. So the respiratory system is still developing, and they still attack it with a lot of things from the outside. And you can see here on the left picture, the asthmatic airway compared to the normal airway. So that's when I said that they're inflamed, and then whatever comes makes it more irritated. So when we looked into what are the problems in Morocco, precisely that cause this big problem of air pollution, The first one is that most air quality monitoring is done in developed countries, not in Morocco, and there is a lack of diversity. So most of open data sets, for example, that I was searching for to do my work were either in Paris or in China or in, like, these are the ones that I found that were open. There was one in Spain as well, one in Italy, but I never found any data set about Morocco. And usually they could involve some polluting measurements, but no sources or impacting factors. And as I mentioned already, the monitoring stations are highly expensive and require a lot of maintenance. A fun anecdote about that, yeah, this is the price for one single station is 200,000 USD for a single station without the maintenance costs. And the funny anecdote that I met when I was doing my research in Morocco is that this was in one of the pages about surveillance of air quality. And I was super excited because I found that there were 31 monitoring stations and 2 of them were mobile stations. And I was really happy because I thought I fell on a gold mine of data. But then when I went to actually ask for this data set, I was told that none of them was working. And because every time they changed the parameters in one to fix another, they ended up having none actually. So that's why we had to adopt our own strategy, which is a bottom-up approach. So I first started with the medical investigation. So using the patients that I introduced you to before, we tried to have a better understanding of the factors creating their respiratory diseases or exacerbating their respiratory diseases. And then we tried to introduce an approach for agile deployment. So meaning that these patients actually, we had asked them to put sensor nodes, low-cost sensor nodes in their household. So in their windows, and they felt that they were involved as well because we were able to give them the data that we were measuring. So they had always the first insights on the air quality outside, and they accepted to place the sensor nodes in their houses. Then the deployment strategy did not include only the patients, but also people who were healthy. And we tried to have a diverse coverage, but mostly focusing on disadvantaged areas inclusion, because these are the places where, like, they usually suffer from a double injustice because there is already disadvantaged living and then also the air pollution due to certain things happening there. And then, of course, we also focus on sources identification and socioeconomic status. For that, for example, when we were doing the study and asking certain questions, we found that, for instance, most of the people that suffered from asthma did live near busy roads. These are some questions that we asked within our surveys, and a lot of patients said that they did live near busy roads. And also, most of the patients lived near noisy neighborhoods. Noisy neighborhoods here is not about noise pollution, but it's more about what are the activities happening in the nearby. So whether there is a traditional market, or, for example, there are some people who work with cars, like mechanical shops, which usually make a lot of noise, and which are, in Morocco, unfortunately, we're still, they're within the neighborhoods where people live. So they are not in a separate area, but where people actually live. So we were able, as you can see here, to have our sensors all over the capital. So the green little clouds are actually sensors deployed in all of the neighborhoods of Rabat. We were able to cover all of them. And then we started collecting the data. So this went for quite a period of time. So it started in my 3rd year of PhD and went until the 5th one. So, and that allowed us to, for example, also measure the air quality, but also relate it to certain activities. For instance, when I was walking to measure the air pollution, I would stop whenever the air pollution was really high. So I had a mobile sensor node. We placed it in the houses, but also I had the mobile sensor nodes. And I was able to see every time that the pollution increased drastically, I was able to stop and see why it did that. And then we computed the distance to the sources that we thought was the cause. And we found out that, for instance, for PM10, which should not be above 50 microgram per cubic meter, here it was 400, while 50 is already dangerous. But it was 400 because we were nearby a public bath. And public bath is an activity that is still very common in Morocco, which is a place where you go to take a bath, but it's with wood and you burn wood and there is a lot of smog and pollution coming out of it. And then there were open air thrift shops, which I was surprised to find that they created such high levels of PMs, but we assumed that it was because of the small particles. And then there were street food vendors, which use a lot of coil and and sometimes a lot of different ways. It's like cooking outdoors, actually, which is very common also in Kenya. But then traffic was only the fourth one, while in Europe, for instance, heating and traffic are the most most features causing pollution. So for that, like I mentioned, we had the low-cost sensor node. So it's the one that you are seeing here. It's very small, and here it's put in one of the windows of the people that volunteered to put the sensors in their houses. And then here, this is a picture of me, actually, but I'm illustrating myself going in some streets and trying to measure as much sources of pollution as possible. So every time, as I said, I detected very high level of pollution, or like the sensor detected very high level of pollution. I tried to register everything that was in my surrounding. And then we also had the fixed monitoring station. These low-cost sensor nodes are easily assembled, easily used, and all compatibles are available in the market. And during a conversation I had before with Professor Andres, I said that it can easily even be made at home. And the cost of it was only 95 euros compared to the 200,000 that I talked about before for the high-cost monitoring station. So we were measuring PM10, PM2.5, humidity, and temperature, just so that we can relate also to some meteorological data. And then we had another strategy, which was using Google Maps. In addition to the walking that I was doing and that, so using Google Maps and some geographical information system, I was able to put buffers for each sensor node that you could see. And for each sensor node, I detected all the natural resources, aerial roads, lower capacity roads, parkways, tunnels, so anything on the surrounding of the sensor that could refer to a source of pollution. For instance, if there is the sea, then there is high chances that the PMs are increased because of natural sources of pollution, which are, for instance, if there is sea salt increases the PM levels. If there is a desert nearby, then it increases the chances of pollution. But then, of course, if there is parkings, that's also, or very large capacity roads, then of course that also for us is considered a source. Plus the things that I had measured by myself. So like you can see on the right side, there is also the sources that I had put into a platform. So it was an application that we have made to register all the sources that we think could be responsible for the pollution. And we put them there. So either barbers, like public oven, public baths, taxi stops, station parking, embroidery, mechanical shops. So all of them were here and were put to, as a source of pollution. This allowed us to have, I was proudly and happy to say, the first data set in Africa, because there was no data sets publicly available. With the monitored neighborhoods, both affluent and disadvantaged, and it was in CSV format, and it was a labeled data. So like for each neighborhood, we had also the number, for instance, of public baths or the number of mechanical shops with the air pollution related to it. Then so far there was a little bit of AI, so because AI is a very big field, so it's either machine learning or, like, for example, we use the geographical information system to do statistical analysis. But then now comes the actual machine learning models, where all of the data that are measured were analyzed and then pre-processed and put into a prediction model. So for our AI part, what we do is that we try to use in this sources that I mentioned before, the data that was measured from the sensor nodes, the data that was an input from me, the data was an input from Google Maps, and everything all together in one model to have the most important insight and get predictions and also the features that are responsible for this pollution. And from that, we were able to actually detect all the features using spatial, traffic-related, and meteorological features. We were able to detect all of the locations that were the most or highly polluted with the sources that came because of it. And here you can see actually something that shows, we call it the features importance. So using machine learning or AI, what it does is that it takes the model, it studies the model very well, and then it finds the features that contributed the most to the high levels of pollution. And then you can see here that I put it into different clusters, so either natural. So for natural, it was water area type, which I talked about was the sea salt that I mentioned before. For the buildings, it was the distance to nearest public bath or oven. So that was the one that impacted most, but then distance to cuisine or, like, for the people cooking was not as important as, for example, public baths. For the transportation, the most important one was the distance to nearest taxi stations, because taxis in Morocco are very cheap. They're like €1 for a small distance. So there is a lot of taxis, and in their stop, there's a lot of old cars that are starting to, that want to go somewhere. So it was the most important, followed by distance to nearest bus station, then distance to nearest road. And for the outdoor activity, the most important was distance to nearest traditional market, because the traditional markets are areas where there is a lot of activities going on, either selling or food, cooking, or many other things. And we were able to do predictions for the next 48 hours. So by having data, you can always predict for the next 24 hours or 48 hours. Until you have, so these are the models that were used. So I didn't want to go into details on AI, so I just made it very high level. So, but I can explain more, of course, later if you have any questions. And you can see here, these are two predictions. The first one is actually the PM's real-time measurements. So this is a heat map of how pollution was in real time. And the next picture is the prediction. So you can see that it's almost the same picture, only a few differences in colors, but the heat map for the prediction and for the real-time measurement is the same, which means that we are able to have predictions even if we do not have data in time, like in the future, not in the past.
Isam, we think we need to be briefing because we still have.
Yes, I still have 7 minutes, right?
No, you have no minutes.
Okay,
No,
okay.
we're talking.
Okay, I thought it was half an hour.
No, it was 20 minutes. Sorry.
Okay, sure, sorry. Okay, so you could see here that the heat map was also very similar. Like the place where the patients were concentrated is also the place where we found the highest level of pollution and of features. And the current case study in Kenya is a study that we are trying to merge sensor nodes that are already placed in Kenya, because we found many, with citizens' input and the other sensors that we will be deploying. I can add more to the conversation later when we have our discussion or panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isham, very much. I'm sorry for this. Thank you very much for a very, very insightful presentation.
No worries.
Thank you. We have a very fruitful discussion in a minute, in 20 minutes actually, because Nick Ryer is coming. Nick is an anthropologist, a postdoctoral research associate affiliated to the Department of Social Cultural Anthropology at KU Leuven and the Center for Anthropological Research on Affect and Materiality at Ghent University. He's got a background in African studies, and he's coordinated applied projects in Central Africa. He has experience as a program coordinator at the Department of Social and Cultural Anthropology in KU Leuven, and now is coordinating the state-of-the-art research consortium on chronic respiratory disease in Africa. I won't go further on because I don't want to take more time because we're running a bit out of time. I think this is a very, very interesting approach after all this range of different focuses on the issue of waste management. And Nick is going to give us a cultural anthropology perspective, which is very fascinating. And we were very lucky, very fortunate to follow it on the ground in Nakuru. So Nick, the floor is yours. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. I don't know if you all hear me.
Yes, it's perfect.
Perfect. And you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm immediately going to delve in. So yes, what I'm going to try to do today is shift a bit the attention from looking at the dump site from outside towards looking from a dump site to a dump site from the inside. So along the lived realities of the waste pickers that live on these dump sites, specifically the Kyoto dump site that was already mentioned today in Nakuru, Kenya. So I'm going to start with an ethnographic vignette that kind of introduces what I want to talk about today. Ayo, standing inside an excavation pit, explains the various layers he's coming across. In this pit, there are about 4 layers, he tells me. The bottom is scrap metal, followed by waste from the ever-ready battery company, then a soil layer covering the waste, and finally polythene papers on the surface. Waingo asks if Ayo has passed the ash layer while digging. And Ayo shakes his head. No, here we're just digging on luck, he says. And then Waingo turns towards me and elaborates. Sometimes, he says, you're lucky to find a pocket of scrap metal dumped in one place. Other times, you have to dig horizontal corridors when the metal parts are scattered across a bigger area. An ash layer often serves as a reliable marker bearing traces of fires that swept through the dump site in the 1980s. During that period, large quantities of sawdust were discarded by wood processing companies, creating highly flammable conditions that fueled frequent fires. And when Waingo and Ayo spot it in the strata of the dump site, they know they're likely to hit something valuable soon. Metals are found just below the ash layer and lower. When we dig, scrap metals gives off a particular smell, Waingo adds. That's how we know we might find the valuable stuff. Laughing, Ayo jokes, we're like dogs sniffing out the scent. And Waingo nods and adds, everything has its own smell, even medical waste. That's how you can tell it apart from the other waste. Waingo adds to the description of the layers we are seeing. At the bottom, he says, the first thing you'll find is either scrap metal or glass bottles, and sometimes they alternate with each other. The next layer is waste from the ever-ready battery company, which has many layers to it because the company used to dump here so often. Then comes the soil or ash layer, and finally polythene bags and plastics at the top. Pausing, he adds, while laughing, when you hit unusual amounts of condoms, you've reached around 1985, the time of the AIDS pandemic. Between 1994 and 1998, HIV and AIDS was at its peak in Kenya. Joel, working inside of another pit, about 2 meters deep, is digging horizontally. "I've found the battery layer, and there's a lot of metal and zinc here," he explains. He points to a sack by the pit filled with metal and zinc scraps. "This is the third layer from the top and the last before the ground level. The top layer is polythene and the second layer is compacted soil and ash," he repeats. He has started tunneling along the metal layer when cracks appear just below the layer of polythene bags. And shortly after, the pit collapses, and Joel was just able to jump out in time, and Ben explains what just happened. When county officials use bulldozers to flatten the dump site again, it creates risks. The vibrations cause cracks and the pits collapse. While the group packs up for the day, they discuss where to bring their harvest. So this vignette introduces well the central theme of what I want to discuss today, an exploration of the composition and history of waste at Giotto, Nakuru's largest dump site. I present a layered analysis of the city's wastescape by sifting through the dump site together with the city's waste pickers. Waste pickers such as Ayo and Waingo identify as migodi, literally meaning gold diggers. They are the growing group of waste pickers that excavate the landfill as a mine. As debates over the dump site's future intensify, whether it's about its privatization, relocation, or the new waste management policies, emphasizing sorting waste at its source, the flow of new valuables to the dump site has significantly diminished. The work of regular waste pickers sorting the waste that comes in thus faces mounting threats as the state advances efforts to regulate Giotto. This highlights a broader tension between the informal networks that sustain waste management in many countries in the South and the formal structures seeking to control them as part of emerging green economies. The scarcity and available valuable waste that enters the landfill compels migodi such as Waingo and Ayo to dig deeper, unearthing remnants from a time when waste management was virtually non-existent. The number of migodi specializing in these excavations is gradually growing in Nakuru, with peak activity during Kenya's dry season, as it's then easier and safer to dig deeper trenches. My fieldwork among migodi focuses on how memory is embedded in the city's discarded materials. So my analytical excavation of the city's waste, together with migodi, presents the city's sedimented wastescape as a site of active memory making, whereby discarded materials become tangible markers of the violent extractive histories that shaped and still shape the life worlds of waste pickers that ended up on the dump site through processes of historical marginalization and exclusion. By memory making, I refer here to the process through which waste pickers actively construct, interpret, and repurpose the past through their daily work with waste. In bringing valuables such as zinc and metal to the surface, they also unearth the city's violent industrial histories, as well as their place within those histories. The labor of waste pickers thereby challenges the notion that waste is an endpoint and demonstrates instead how dump sites function as planetary archives, where histories of industrial capitalism, colonial afterlives, and economic precarity remain layered, contested, and actively reworked. As the title of my presentation today suggests, One Black Anthropocene, I built on Catherine Yusuf's book, A Billion Black Anthropocenes, which argues that the Anthropocene is not a race-neutral concept, but a racialized project rooted in the extractive violence of colonialism. Yusuf asserts that the post-racial we of the Anthropocene discourse fails to acknowledge that Black and brown death is the precondition of every Anthropocene origin story. This violence has shaped concrete, situated histories across the African continent, structuring the uneven distribution of environmental degradation, dispossession, and economic precarity. Expanding on this critique, I present today One Black Anthropocene from the perspective of Nakuru's waste pickers. Whereas geologists define the Anthropocene through sedimented markers such as ice cores, nuclear fallout, or plastic residues, so-called golden spikes, Giotto dump site functions as a counter site where planetary transformation is inscribed in layers of industrial debris, toxic accumulation, and the struggles of waste pickers rendered surplus to mainstream society. This point of view acknowledges that the Anthropocene does not begin with objective geological deposits alone. It begins when it is recognized, acknowledged, and contested in discourse, practice, and politics. It takes on multiple forms and trajectories, resonating across personal histories, scientific inquiry, and lived experience. The radical positionality I present here today looks at a Nakuru Anthropocene from the perspective of the city's waste pickers as captured in the sedimented remains of industrial decline, in the toxic materials they sift through daily, and in their lived experiences of dispossession, survival, and resourcefulness. Their Anthropocene is marked by the erosion of labor opportunities, the sifting politics of waste, and the ever-present precarity of being rendered both essential yet expendable to the city's metabolism. One could argue that the ash layer referenced in the opening vignette of my presentation today, used as a navigational marker within the dump strata, serves as a kind of geological golden spike, signaling the transition from a throwaway society to an emerging culture of recycling. Waste pickers often describe their grandparents as unaware of the value hidden in waste. They didn't have the expertise, one waste picker remarked about it. Before recycling became common practice, everything was simply discarded. And now we can use waste to make a living, they argued. Let's pause for some contextual information. The presented stories emerge from Nakuru, a secondary city in Kenya with a population of approximately 600,000 people, according to the 2019 census. And the city is situated about 160 kilometers northwest of the capital, Nairobi. Historically, Nakuru was known under colonial rule as the White Highlands, a region inhabited and agriculturally exploited by European settlers. As a thriving economic center, Nakuru became the industrial epicenter of Kenya. Industries such as pyrethrum processing, the Kenya Seed Company, Ever-Ready Batteries, Iliad's Bakeries, Samcon Limited Steel Factory contributed to Nakuru's peak at the heart of economic growth and high employment from the 70s to the mid-90s. The city's strategic location and agricultural resources supported robust processing industries, including food and animal feeds, textiles, and agrochemicals such as pyrethrum. But the liberalization of Kenya's markets beginning in the late 80s led to an influx of cheaper imports, driving many of these industries to either downsize or shut down completely. Yet the traces of the city's industrial past persist in the sedimented layers of waste at Kyoto dump site, now a focal point in debates over Nakuru's efforts to green its future. It is worth pausing again to explain my use of the concept of traces. I use tracing as both a methodological and analytical concept and approach, drawing on Geisler's concept of traces as complex temporal layers. Tracing entails drawing connections between past events that result in present decay and also allow future possibilities. For Nakuru's waste pickers, discarded remnants gain value when meticulously traced and reclaimed, circulating through networks of meaning-making and value creation. Through this process, waste ceases to be debris and instead becomes a site of historical reconstruction of the violent histories of displacement and economic opportunity. It is through their shared toxic entanglements with Nakuru's waste that the Migodi I work with challenge their perceived marginalization as surplus populations, once laborers in the city's thriving industries, but now cast to the fringes of mainstream society. Indeed, many of them are descendants of families who migrated to Nakuru seeking opportunities in Nakuru's then thriving factories, such as the aforementioned Ever-Ready Batteries and the Kenya Seed Company. These families came to Nakuru fleeing from waves of violence, land dispossession, and the complexities of Kenya's post-independence land resettlement schemes. These schemes intended to redistribute land from colonial settlers to Kenyan citizens, but often favored the elite and politically connected, leaving many landless or trapped in precarious arrangements. Corruption, unequal distributions, and contested land titles further exacerbated displacement and forced many to migrate to urban centers like Nakuru in search for stable livelihoods. They embody the legacy of generations of family who once lived in informal settlements, such as Biafra, Soweto, Bangladesh, City Kartan, Gitiga, and Kenya Meat, all neighborhoods in Nakuru that were established on public land, including formal railway territory and government land, much of which has been reclaimed by government over the past few decades. With the liberalization of Kenya's markets in the late 1980s and 1990s, marked by the removal of trade barriers, privatization and state-owned enterprises, and reduced government support for local industries, many factories struggled to compete with the influx of the cheaper imported goods, and as a result, numerous of these industries downsized or shut down completely. And the former workers and their descendants, unable to secure stable livelihoods and employment, gradually moved to the dump site as a means of survival. Others arrived in the aftermath of the brutal 2007-2008 post-election violence, displaced by ethnic clashes and political unrest. And a smaller group also migrated from Uganda, fleeing political upheaval during Idi Amin's regime in the 1970s and 80s. It's against this backdrop that fragmented remnants of information embedded in the city's historical vestiges gain renewed significance in the cities when meticulously traced and reclaimed, transforming into active sites of meaning making and value creation. This ongoing iterative process shapes waste pickers' understanding of the city's shifting temporal and spatial dynamics, as well as their own place within it, alongside the evolving role of waste itself. As waste pickers sift through the toxic layers of the dump site, feeling the textures of decay, reading the imprints of past industries, and inhaling the distinct sense of the layers they cut across, they engage in a form of stratigraphic interpretation. Each layer becomes a material archive, a sedimented history of the city's industrial past. And in this process, waste is imbued with both moral and material significance, as pickers distinguish between what is worthless and what still holds value in the afterlives of the city's refuse. Yet as they sift through these layers, they also unearth personal and collective histories. Memories of childhood, family narratives, and past livelihoods surface alongside the industrial residues, intertwining the materiality of waste with intimate recollections of belonging, displacement, and survival in the city. Ben, for instance, vividly recalled how, as a child during the post-election violence of 2007, scavenged for scrap metal left behind by workers at the dump site. With no stable home and his family struggling to navigate the turmoil of displacement, he learned to identify valuable waste, and each day he would recollect and sell these scraps, slowly accumulating enough money to support himself. The earnings from his labor became deeply personal. It was with this money that he was able to undergo circumcision and eventually get married. And here on this slide, you see how I kind of developed various stratigraphies, stratigraphic images of how the waste pickers in Nakuru, the Migodi, they themselves kind of visualize the various layers of the dump site. The work of Migodi resembles the observations made by Fredericks on a landfill in Dakar, where, and I quote here, the dump is viewed simultaneously as a shared resource and history, a sedimented artifactual record of Senegal's post-colonial period they expertly excavate, archive, and deploy to get ahead in a cutthroat economy, end of quote. But for the waste pickers of Nakuru, the dump site as a sedimented artifactual record prompts following questions. How exactly are these present acts of excavation and archiving linked to the turbulent industrial histories that these unearthed objects expose? And how do the Migodi navigate and layer their place within them as they are brought to the surface? The work of Migodi underscores the broader challenges of African cities under the pressures of late capitalism, where enduring toxic legacies, whether it's in the form of material waste or colonial histories, are inseparably intertwined with uncertain futures. Excavating Giotto's toxic layers uncovers not only a material stratigraphy, but also a moral one. While digging, the Migodi cast a moral lens on the violent histories embedded in Nakuru's colonial and industrial past, engaging in what I term as negotiating viability, where viability refers to what sustains life. Migodi share family histories of displacement and exclusion, framing these narratives around the industrial legacies of the artifacts they unearthed, such as the zinc battery cores from the now closed Eveready Battery Company. The labor of unearthing remnants in Nakuru, of Nakuru's industrial past, becomes a means for them for sustaining life amid the city's colonial and neo-colonial legacies, neoliberal reality, and the recent exclusionary push towards green futures, initiatives often controlled by the city's elites. Through their work, Migodi reclaim a sense of belonging within the city's shifting urban landscape and carve out spaces of viability amid persistent exploitation, toxicity, and exclusion. This viability is much in line with what anthropologist Stacey Langwick refers to as a politics of habitability, or, and I quote here, the ability to shape the conditions of possibility for thriving and becoming, end of quote. The work of Migodi is guided by nuanced knowledge of where and how to uncover the often contested, layered histories of Nakuru's industrial past. And they do so based on childhood memories or stories from elder family members who worked in the industries that dumped their waste at Giotto. Expertise that distinguishes waste pickers from Nakuruans in other informal settlements of the city. Self-identifying as experts in Nakuru's waste economies, they navigate their pursuit of maisha poa, Swahili for the good life, but this under anthropocenic conditions, framed around deriving sustenance and meaning from substances that mainstream society so desperately tries to avoid. In this context, toxicity serves as both a foundation for viability and a framework for identity politics at the city's margins. From the dump site, Migodi uproot, archive, and moralize the city's histories in deeply embodied and corporal ways. Hence, why I plead for a viability-centered approach to waste governance that attends to the relational processes through which waste work becomes meaningful and possible, rather than focusing solely on formalization or even elimination of waste and its agents. A research agenda must ask, what forms of life are made viable within waste economies, and what futures are imagined and enacted within these spaces? And how are they constructed from the layered histories of discard, colonialism, and late capitalism embedded in the dump's strata? Engaging with these questions allows for a rethinking of waste infrastructures as dynamic sites of struggle, possibility, and future making, instead of static or peripheral. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nick, for a very, I think, fascinating approach to waste management. Although you don't see it, and we have had a for Isham, if she's still there. Professor Tiamiyu has to have to leave recently, but we've had a very, very intense presence of students of different degrees. Some of them have to leave, but others are coming, which makes me very happy. Thank you very much for sharing your time with us. Most of them are double degree in sociology, international relations, and development. So this is I think, a very, very central topic to their studies. I really hope some of you might end doing some further research, a dissertation or something in this field. We will be very happy to support you. And you have here an incredible chance of contacting with, networking with some of the most protagonists of this symposium in Leuven and in Nairobi and elsewhere. So thank you very much, Nick, for this insightful presentation. I would open the floor now to research, to questions and comments on the public, on ourselves. Um, is there any comments you want to add or something to any questions from the public you want to start with? I know it's very intimidating, but it's we're in family here, we're friends, so just feel free. Anna has a question.
Can you hear me?
Nick?
Yes?
Yes?
Okay.
Sham?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to be here. My name is Anna. I'm from the Zero Waste Alliance in Spain. And it was really fascinating. My question has two parts. How is legislation moving in some of the countries that you represent to find solutions for the problem? And also, is the EU legislation, the directives and regulations, are they being taken into account with the positive and negative aspects of it? Thank you.
So who you address it?
Any of you who has an answer for me?
Maybe that includes Margaret too, I guess. Maybe Isham, we want to start.
I think I'm the further from legislations.
Okay.
But what I can say is that, at least for the case of the project that I presented before, when we presented a state of the art and showed and pointed out some issues, the stakeholders actually took action. When they saw everything that was happening, I saw that they took action, and a lot of things have changed since then, even though there were not any legislations or laws then. But maybe, I don't know who can give a better answer about that. Maybe, yeah.
I
Nick.
can maybe try for the Nakuru case. So I know there's this regained focus on waste management at its source. There's a zero waste bill that was introduced in Kenya. I think Margaret might have already mentioned that before, right? If I remember well. But so often the legislation that is there or the interventions that are there, they kind of approach it from the private market, right? It's part of this, we have to close the financing gap for sustainable development. So instead of having traditional kind of development interventions, we want to incentivize the private market to come up with solutions. So there's this green economy that is introduced, but if you then translate these kind of efforts to a local context like Nakuru, you see, and Margaret mentioned that before this morning, that a lot of politics come into place. She mentioned, for instance, for the Nakuru case, that indeed the waste pickers have organized themselves in a waste pickers association, but there's micropolitics lead to a lot of distrust in these associations, but also competition at the level of the dump site. So the Migodi that I, for instance, presented on, they deliberately choose not to be part of these associations because they don't trust them. They see it as another kind of manifestation of elitism in the country, whereby in the end, they don't benefit from these greening interventions in the city. And that ties then back to distrust in these kind of state interventions. That is stooled on the whole idea of them as surplus populations that have had to deal already with generations of violence introduced against them through the kind of resettlement schemes, colonial governance, and how they became then surplus to mainstream society. So there is a lot of effort to come up with greening interventions and legislation at the local level. But at least from my experience as an anthropologist, doing research among these waste pickers, I see that they are often again forgotten in the futures that are imagined and aspired by state interventions. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yes, thank you very much.
You want to add something?
Yes, maybe I can just add. Thank you, Anna, for your question. Earlier on, I had explained about the Nairobi County context, which is quite similar to the one Nick has referred to, which is he was looking more at the smaller city of Nakuru. But in terms of regulations, I must say Kenya has, I think one of the best regulations ever. the real problems and the real challenges that we have as a country on any field, any sector, has to do with enforcement. Enforcement is very weak. For instance, in the city of Nairobi, there is a 2015 Waste Management Act for the county. And then one that governs the entire nation was developed in 2022, the Sustainable Waste Management Act. And so in terms of legal frameworks, it's not that we are at a loss, but in terms of their enforcement. And just to give the overall framework of how this is governed, in 2010, we had the new constitution that we more or less put in force. And so what it has brought about is a new dispensation within which the counties are now responsible for handling all the urban development issues. So you may find that, for instance, when we did the visits to the field, we went to Nairobi, Dandora dam site. We were also received by the sub-county officials in the area in Embakasi North. And you find how they go about handling the waste management in Dandora and the way that Nakuru County government handles their waste management in Gyoto dam site, quite different, because you find that in Nakuru, being that it's a smaller city, the dynamics are much less, and they have really made some efforts to remove as much politics. So they're more able to include and incorporate their waste pickers through these associations, and they give them a chance to participate, even bringing them on board on the table, discussing with them whatever futures they are negotiating, they have actually reached out to them. Whereas on the other hand, in Nairobi, it's still a very contested space from whichever level you look at it, whether it's from the level of the county, whether it's from the national level. I think it's because of the what is at stake. It's a capital city, and the interests are so many, and so managing them has been such a challenge, and the progress is very small or very slow in comparison to the scale of the problem. So there's that mismatch that exists, and it really requires a whole lot more of mobilization, which we are hopeful that, focusing on these issues is going to help us raise more awareness and create those networks that we really need to be able to address these issues. Because at that scale, if we leave it at that scale only for one actor to handle, it's too much. The scale of the problem is too big.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Any other comments you want to mention? I might add that I think both your both presentations and of course Ahmed have been very interesting, especially last two ones very complementary on this idea of, on the one side, how pollution can be measured with all these new technologies. And I remember talking to you when we met and being very fascinated with your work and asking what is the purpose of measuring and sensorizing and putting these little sensors you mentioned everywhere. And it's very interesting because generating information nowadays empowers people and empowers not only agencies or governments, but also empowers people, communities, and literally anyone can have access through little devices, these little things that make us slaves, but also to some extent can make us a little bit more conscient, more autonomous, more activist. So I think it's very interesting, and we were exchanging a minute ago. It was certainly not very scientific, not boring at all. It has been a very, very beautiful presentation. We learn a lot. And about Nick, as I think it's also very interesting, this perspective of reading Anthropocene and basically the recent history of environment through these people that they just dig out for their survival and try to find things that have been there for ages. And it's also a good reflection of how we dispose materials and waste, which in the future, later on, today, are incredibly valuable, and 60 years ago were just scrap metals. I think it's a very good reflection of where we're doing with the planet, and probably in a far future, we're going to find companies scavenging and looking for old plastics which can be recycled and will be again digging a hidden treasure, because we don't forget that the motto of most of these waste management systems, at least what we saw in Kenya and Nairobi, the first thing that we saw, which really shocked me, was this idea of waste is wealth, no, or waste is money, and it certainly is, and it reproduces a very, very solid structure of capitalism, from a lot of millions of dollars and euros being thrown and dumped into landfills, and being every day recovered by a legion of desperate workers, people's families, which work in very, very hard conditions, are the backbone of recycling. So I think this is a very good homage to them, and like including them in this, and including their work and their vision, this accounting of layers of history, of environmental history. I think it's a very relevant thing. So I don't know, Peter wants to add something.
Unless there's somebody else. I wanted to have a small comment on Nick's presentation, and then building a bit on your waste is money. So Nick, you claim that you have this insider perspective, but I would think you do much more than that. You make connections to more structural factors, including rural-urban migration, the history of the city, colonialism, politics. You mentioned the liberalization politics in the 80s and 90s. So I think it shows how the whole issue is much more than one perspective, or needs really multiple perspectives. The question about legislation, for example, is for me only one part of the whole thing. And you mentioned a few of them. What I miss a bit in maybe Ahmad's story, or well, the different presentations give different perspectives, showing the need of all these perspectives. But I miss maybe a little bit the global interests and the money, the real money, the power that is immense. And I'll finish by referring to my own city in Flanders. So the city of Antwerp has one of the biggest ports in Europe, and it's a petrochemical cluster. So that's where all the plastic is produced. And it employs, I don't know how many, like half of the city or half of the region. So it attracts people that work for this petrochemical industry and that make a living out of it. So on the one hand, there's huge amounts of money going in there, huge amounts of money earned in the petrochemical business and industry, and there's Bayer and Monsanto and BASF and all that. It's the biggest companies in the world. They are the hardest ones to fight. Very recently, a new plant was granted a permit, for example. It was fought by the environmental movement. They didn't make it. So that on the one hand. And on the other hand, there are people making a living out of this industry. So if you contest this industry, you need to find solutions for the jobs of these 10,000s, maybe 100, I don't know, maybe not 100, but at least 10,000 of people that work there. So it's a very, that's a bit a part of the story that I miss a little bit. Yeah, there's a question in there for you, Nick, about the richness of your story.
Yeah, thank you for that question. it's interesting, and I think in the longer version of the paper I presented today, I delve a bit more into the idea of value creation. So basically, there's two parts to it, right? It's memory making and value creation. Whereby memory making is more about unearthing these vestiges from the past, and by doing so, negotiating ways personal histories within these broader histories of dispossession and exclusion and marginalization that mark surplus population realities in a Kenyan context. And then there's value creation, which is more future oriented. And you see, for instance, that on the dump site, you have all these different kind of forms of futuring that converge into that hotspot, basically that hotspot that is then the dump site or the landfill. You have foreign interests through these development finance institutes that are behind the green agendas, right, that are globally being introduced through private financing. These plans to put an energy generation plant on the dump site and then privatize the whole area, while at the same time the waste pickers also engage in their own forms of green futuring, whereby a lot of them actually don't live there anymore officially, but keep their informal houses and settlements on the dump site to have a right to claim that as a home, as a place of belonging. And why? Because of course then they have access to the valuables and the recycling economies that are behind the dump site. But a lot of them actually then through value creation have bought cheap land in Menengai. That's a volcano just north of the landfill. So the landfill is situated on the slopes of the volcano, and inside of the crater there's geothermal energy that is being produced, which is part of the green futuring agenda of the city and the nation at large. And land became accessible to these communities because roads are being constructed, and land all of a sudden in the crater became a valuable asset to have now that the prices are still okay. So we have a lot of these waste pickers that forged more viable lives for themselves outside of the dump, but want to keep their ties, their historical belonging to the dump as a way to create value for themselves, monetary value, but also value in terms of belonging within this kind of marginalized context that puts them at the fringes of mainstream society. But so indeed you have all these kind of value chains that then converge into the dump site. The emic value chain that I just explained from the point of view of the waste pickers, but also these development finance institutes, this up to a political level, right? In the city of Nakuru, if you own the pickup trucks that go collect waste, it's an incredibly lucrative business to have, and that's where these waste pickers also try to negotiate their position within all of these value realities that converge at the dump site. And one example is, for instance, that a few months back, waste pickers in Nakuru came to the streets and were protesting with slogans saying like, waste picking without waste pickers is garbage, right? Where they actively said like, look, we have the expertise, we are the engines of the city's metabolism, so you have to include us in the value opportunities that are being created on a more national and even global level. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
I think it's a fascinating addition to the story about how it's how all these layers are connected, how the story crosses different scales, and then different mechanisms, but also how the microdynamics are connected to the macrodynamics. So how individual people reproduce also macrostructural dynamics. The waste pickers themselves now become landowners. Well, it's a fascinating addition. It's a bit like the plastic production also employs people that need to make a living in the end, and you need to solve all that.
Yeah, this is a very interesting topic to add to future conferences that I'm sure we're gonna hold. This is a kind of a pilot for me as introducing African studies in this school. There are some groups I mentioned before in the beginning. Most of you were not here, but still, this is a very, very important thing for this particular school of sociology, political science, and anthropology to add African transversal, transdisciplinary vision of Africa. And I think this is, to me, it's like a pilot conference on future developments. And certainly this is a very interesting thing to add, even, adding a more global corporative approach to the whole topic, and see how the whole value chain. So I was saying before, it's a crude reproduction of capitalism, and we is looking at a part of it, but certainly in terms of governance, in terms of value chains, of mobility, of waste, etc. So there are a lot of things of, as Nick is an expert of different layers to be explored further up, those pits that those waste pickers are being exploring so thoughtfully. So thank you very much. Do you have any other comments on your side, the newcomers? So maybe we can leave it here. Thank you very much for coming, all of you, in the different layers that you've been arriving. I hope it's been interesting and stimulating and inspiring for you. And for you students, we are here to, if you want to develop further topics, I probably would talk to Pedro and eventually make a little lecture on these topics, so you can have a thought view on the project, if he allows me. But so thank you very much, and we'll leave it here. And thank you for coming. Thank you, Nick and Isham. We'll see you next week in Leuven. I'm looking forward for that, and every other person joining the streaming. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
¿Quién? Okay, Nick is sharing his mail. I would. Okay. So if everyone, Nick is sharing his email. Anyone, if you want any information about the participants, I will be very happy to share it with you. Just come to me. Muy bien, sí, colgamos. Gracias. Bueno.